With the powder of life, Dorothy was able to throw together a mass of assorted items in the witch's tower, a sofa and a moose's head and other random junk, and brought it to life, creating an assorted mishmash of a creature. It was called the Gump, and, like Jack Pumpkinhead, was a jumbled homunculus of items. Dorothy flew away on Winged Gump, flying across the Deadly Desert. The Deadly Desert, a mass of sand at the border of Oz which, if you so much as touched the sand, would cause you to turn into sand yourself. Several of the wheelers pursued Dorothy, and when the wheels touched the sand, they collapsed. Their bodies yellowed, cracked and fell apart. Their bodies sifted in the wind, the lines and curves of their faces shattering and breaking apart. The Gump rips apart in the air, its wings breaking, and Dorothy and her friends crash land under the mountain of the Gnome King, a sinister creature formed of living rock. The Gnome King was played with austere and stern decorum by Nicol Williamson, a Scottish actor who forged his way through many respected Shakespeare roles on stage and screen before his death in 2011. Williamson also played the Doctor from the hospital back in Kansas. That both the sinister Doctor and his beastly assistant had been incarnated in Oz, actors and all, makes all the more sure that the dark and sinister Oz of this film is but a flash in Dorothy's memory as she drowns in the river during that storm. No, she doesn't drown, but no matter how many times I try to remind myself of the story, I keep thinking that she drowned. I've seen the film as many times as an adult, and yet, each time I watch it, I find myself thinking as she falls into the churning waters of the river, it is here at this point that she drowns. I know in my conscious mind that she doesn't, but each time I think back on the film, I remember Dorothy slipping beneath the thrashing waves, her skin wet and cold, grasping for air, drowning beneath the weight of the water. No, Dorothy does not drown. That's not the story in the film. I keep remembering the film differently. I keep thinking that she drowns, but she doesn't. She doesn't drown. Dorothy does not drown. She goes to Oz and rescues her friends, who have been captured by the Gnome King. She goes into the Gnome King's treasure chamber, where he has turned all of her friends into ornaments, and she brings them back to life. She, little Feruza Balk in her first film role, she didn't drown. She went on to be Stacy in American History X. She didn't drown. She brings them all back to Emerald City. And the Gnome King dies. The evil witch Mombi is captured by the heroes, but the Gnome King dies. Dorothy's companion, the talking chicken called Belina, drops an egg into the Gnome King's mouth. The Gnome King, at this point in the film, having become a gigantic creation of living rock, gags and chokes, he rasps the words, "Eggs, poison," and crumbles. His entire body breaks apart slowly, chunks of rock falling away, taking his face with it. Eggs, poison. Eggs, of course, are not poison. In the film, they are only poisonous to the Gnome King. I never did understand why, and when I was a child, I didn't even realise that it was a condition purely to the Gnome King, and not something that would affect any of the other characters, human or otherwise. The statement was simply a proclamation, a warning. Eggs, poison, while his face turned to rock, churned, boiled, and fell apart like pebbles. Poison. My mother served me a plate of scrambled eggs for lunch. This was 2 weeks before we moved into the city, away from our village home. I had lived in a small village for my entire life. We had no more than 30 buildings and a single main street with its local shop, pub, schoolhouse and church. Surrounded as we were by farmland, a large number of our local produce was agricultural, local beef, pork and eggs. I pushed the plate away. "Not hungry?" asked my mother. I shook my head. Poison. I found the nest during summer. It was hidden in the roots of an old oak tree near the back of the church hall. It had been built by some of the stray chickens who had nested down among the gnarled and twisted roots of the rotting tree. I'd found it one morning whilst on my way to school. It had been raining the night before, and my rubber welly boots were flecked with mud. It was the sound I heard first, a bleating cry. I stepped through the soggy grass and leaned closer, peering through the shadows of the old tree roots. The nest was wet and full of dirt. 2 chickens sat in the dirt, their surfaces glistening from the rain. The 3rd egg lay in pieces. Bits of its shell hung like a deflated balloon. The infant chicken had been born too early. It was premature and half-formed. Its body looked like a wet mess of string. Its skin was oily and black, and seemed to be made of muscle fibre. Its head was too big for its neck, and hung limply onto one side, its eyes open far too wide. It was twitching, as if on a string, trying to breathe, struggling to live. The rest of it was only partly there. It was a premature birth, a fetus of a creature more muscle and tissue than life. Its egg had cracked and spilled the chick into the world, rejecting it. Poison. We didn't have a cafeteria at school. It was too small a building. Instead, the local store would send a van to the back of the schoolhouse where the teachers would collect our meals and bring them into the gym hall, which also doubled as the auditorium, despite it being significantly too small to qualify as one. We sat and ate our lunches. Those who got our lunches from the school van, and those who brought a packed lunch together. My mother had made me some ham sandwiches with the crusts cut neatly off. I sat there with 3 other kids from my class. Chris was a keen football fan. He would usually rush through his lunch in order to finish early so he could hurry into the yard and kick a ball about for a while. Josh was a quiet, bookish sort who had long black hair and a set of strong braces which shone each time he smiled. And there was Gary, who didn't speak much but followed the rest of us around quite eagerly. I chewed on my sandwich for a while, not really speaking. Chris was talking eagerly about a football match he'd watched on television last night. I didn't care about football, and his descriptions of kicks and goals seemed almost like an alien language to me. He took a bite out of his sandwich and continued to talk, spraying bits of food as he did so. I turned to Josh, wanting to tell him about the nest I'd found. I told him about the chick, laying, squirming in the muddy ground, gasping for life. Josh shook his head. "All chickens are little when they're born," he said. I tried to explain that it wasn't simply a baby chick, that it was half-formed and dying, but I was only a child and wouldn't form the description properly. At best, I could explain it as it had been born wrong. Chris took another bite out of his sandwich and made a soft coughing sound. Josh said maybe a fox had found the nest and was eating some of the eggs, and that maybe it had left the dead chick behind. I tried to explain that this might be possible, when Chris coughed again. I turned to look at him. His face looked wrong, brighter and puffier. He coughed again and again, louder, and began to motion towards his throat. A few other kids from nearby turned and noticed, as Chris's coughing became more insistent. He dropped his sandwich, one he had gotten from the lunch van. It fell open, the slices of bread separated to show the creamy white shade of its contents. Egg mayonnaise. Chris tried to stand up but couldn't, tripping as he did so. Josh rushed forward, trying to slap him on the back. "Help!" he shouted. Chris was clasping at his throat now, his face flushing from a pale red to a deeper, more blood-like shade. He was growing frantic and beginning to panic. He was wheezing for air, the breath desperately trying to fill his lungs. But he couldn't. And without any air he would choke to death. But that wasn't right. That wasn't what was killing him. I knew what was killing him. It was the poison. The eggs in the sandwich. The teacher was running over, but Chris had fallen to the floor at this point, his rasping gasps for air filling the small hall. He twitched, thrashing for air, his skin turning a darker shade of red, and I thought about the chick that was doing the very same. I grabbed the teacher's arm. "It's the eggs," I said, insistently, my eyes stinging as I felt tears in them. "The eggs, they're poisoned." Chris was taken to the local doctor's clinic where they found the obstruction in his throat. A large piece of eggshell, almost the size of a small coin, which had burrowed its sharp edge into the side of his throat. I don't think the film is cursed. The whole cursed movie thing doesn't work, not in reality. It may have been the director's only movie, but that doesn't mean anything about it was unusual. I don't think the video I watched was haunted. No, this definitely wasn't the movie that was haunted. It was me. By the time she goes back to Kansas, Dorothy's journey is over. She has found the rightful heir to the throne of Oz and helped to reclaim the world. We learn that the hospital burnt to the ground during the storm. The doctor died in the fire, burnt to death. The Gnome King died, so did the doctor. Both characters, both played by the same actor, met the same fate. But Dorothy was home, and she was wiser and more confident now. Her sadness was gone. She could carry the memory of Oz with her forever. I wonder if that was her curse as well. That poor little Dorothy Gale would forever return to Oz.